So, good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. And welcome to this very special event titled Song for the Earth, the Role of Music Education in the Climate Crisis, hosted as part of this year's Learning Planet Festival. My name is Alexandra, and I'm here to provide you with a short introduction on what is going to happen. First and foremost, we at Sistema Europe, have teamed up with Community Arts Network to bring you a roundtable that explores the intricate ways how music education can play a truly pivotal role in addressing challenges posed by the climate crisis. In the face of the current events, precisely the intersection of music education and environmental sustainability has become a pressing topic that demands utmost attention. It is therefore my pleasure to welcome our esteemed guest speakers who have dedicated a substantial part of their careers to this very exploration of the increasingly crucial relationships between music education and the environment, and who have agreed to share their valuable insights on where these topics can, or maybe perhaps should, overlap. Trisha Tunstall, co-founder of the Ensemble newsletter. Hi, Trisha.
Hi.
Eric Booth, co-founder of the International Teaching Artists Collaborative.
Hi.
And Marshall Marcus, founder and president of Sistema Europe. Hi, Marshall.
Hi.
There will be a Q&A session at the end of this conversation, but if you already have any questions, feel free to use the chat. Or also, if you feel like you want to engage in the discussion sort of during as we speak, then feel free to raise your hand as well. Now, we have another guest who, despite not being able to connect live with us tonight, will play an integral role in this evening. Interspersed in this debate will be a recorded interview with the world-renowned opera singer and educator Joyce Di Donato, in conversation with our host for the evening, Grant Clark. Welcome, Grant.
Hello, thanks.
And greetings to Joyce Di Donato, at least virtually. Before we delve into this conversation, let me also introduce Sistema Europe as the host of tonight's evening, or co-host. While I'm doing that, I wanted to share a short video that we thought would be great to warm up for this evening. Patience. And I wanted to tell you a story about Sistema Europe, network that connects all Sistema and Sistema-inspired organizations that operate in Europe based on Sistema, or El Sistema, the groundbreaking social inclusion project that was created in Venezuela in 1974 and is now spread to over 70 countries worldwide, applying it in its different European settings. As part of the international Sistema movement, Sistema Europe seeks to assist the members and organizations in actively transforming the lives of children, young people, and their families and communities from every section of European society through the practice of orchestral and vocal ensemble music making. Our mission is to foster social inclusion and cultural development through the accessible practice of collective music education. Uniting hundreds of talented young musicians and teachers from our diverse network of programs, Sistema Europe Youth Orchestra, or SEO, is a European orchestra infused with the spirit of El Sistema. Since its inception in 2013, the orchestra has performed in major cities, festivals and concert halls around Europe, including the Grafenek Festival, La Scala in Milan, the Ancient Odeon of Herodes Atticus in Athens, Birmingham Symphony Orchestra Hall, London's Royal Festival Hall, with participation of eminent musicians such as Nicola Benedetti, Jessica Cotis, Joyce Di Donato, Gustavo Dudamel. In February 2022, Young musicians and students from Sistema initiatives from all over Europe reunited in Paris in order to participate in an ambitious and highly symbolic project. Orchestra Demos Europe. A week of rehearsals was followed by a performance at the Philharmonie de Paris on 26th of February 2022, mind the date, where the 120-member orchestra appeared on stage for a unique concert held on the occasion of France's presidency of the Council of the European Union. The project then traveled to Strasbourg for the occasion of the Europe Day, when on 9th May, the orchestra performed at the European Parliament as well as the Opéra National du Rhin. In July 2022, 140 young people from 17 European countries took to Madrid's Auditorio Nacional de Música to demonstrate the transformative power of music as part of SEO, Sistema Europe Youth Orchestra, held in collaboration with Acción por la Música. Now, what we are going to see now, and I hope that between the sound works out, is the flash mob that the children and young music students did in Plaza del Colón in Madrid. It was also, and by the way, under the motto "We play to transform the world," sort of promoting United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, what you've just heard was Ritmos Ciganos, or I hope that you heard it, which is a staple in the SEO Council program, and will also definitely be played in the upcoming Sistema Europe Youth Orchestra Summer Camp, which is taking place in July 2024 in Pesaro in Italy, in partnership with our Italian friends LiberaMusica. Now, a little bit of that, set against the backdrop of the breathtaking Adriatic seaside, its activities spread between the cities of Pesaro and Urbino, the birthplace of the great Raphael. The biannual gathering style is Song for the Earth, hence the title of this evening, and is held with the celebration of Pesaro, Italian Capital of Culture 2024. But going back to our topic for this evening, the project actually aims to go beyond the usual framework of sustainability well known to the music industry. In a series of initiatives blending music with environmental awareness, SEO24 will explore how climate change is affecting music and also sort of try to champion the role of nature in our lives. For instance, series of lectures will focus on the impact of climate change on musical instruments, and for instance, like how windstorms are damaging the spruce trees used for Stradivarius violins. Another project, SEO Garden 2024, involves local school children planting a garden for pollinators, creating a lasting green space in the community. They also introduce sound walking, site-specific concert where the music played by humans is at the service of nature and highlights the sound belonging to that place. And lastly, orchestra camping will take our orchestra members on a low-impact camping trip, promoting respect for nature and the environment. The grand finale concert will then take place at the recently renovated Spazio Balena Cantiere Rossini, a former shipyard repurposed as a performance venue. For this unique event, we're excited to partner with the Rossini Opera Festival, renowned for its spectacular production under the artistic direction of Juan Diego Flores. Finally, before I hand over to Grant to begin our enlightening event, I would like to introduce his work as well. Grant Clark is an award-winning journalist, media leader, and communications specialist. In a 30-year career, he has led international newsrooms, media projects, and has produced content for leading news media providers, including the BBC, Al Jazeera, NPR, and PBS. He has delivered communication strategy for civil society organizations such as Global Civic Action Alliance, Civicus, including running global media campaigns around climate justice and other human rights issues. He joins us from his base in Johannesburg, South Africa. Grant, the floor is yours. Thanks everyone for joining us in this important discussion, and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Really appreciate it. And good evening, everybody. I'm really happy to be here and excited, looking forward to a really good conversation about such an important issue. I know that we met our guests earlier that Alexandra introduced us to, but I just wanted to tell a little bit more about each, just so I imagine that most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with them, but just so that everybody's on the same page, just to tell you a little bit more, Marshall Marcus is the president of Sistema Europe, and he's also the executive director of the European Union Youth Orchestra, as well as the founder of Sistema Africa, and he's a director and trustee of Sistema England and a member of the Sistema Global's advisory board. Before his time with Al Sistema, Marshall was head of music at London South Bank Centre, the Royal Festival Hall, co-founder and later chairman and CEO of the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment. Just to say, all our guests tonight are trailblazers in the field of music education for social impact, so we're really lucky to have them and that they were available. Eric Booth is the co-founder of the International Teaching Artist Collective. Eric's accomplishments are too many to mention, but needless to say, he's an artist, a business owner, and an author. His latest book, which has just come out a couple months ago, if I'm not mistaken, Eric, is called Making Change, Teaching Artists and Their Role in Shaping a Better World. Eric's work in the field of teaching artistry is extensive, and he's been called the father of the teaching artist profession, which is quite a prestigious title. Then Tricia Tunstall is a musician, teacher, music educator, and author, accomplished author in her own right. She is the co-founder of The Ensemble, which is a groundbreaking newsletter connecting and informing all who are committed to ensemble music education for youth empowerment and social change. Tricia has written extensively about the Al Sistema system, the focus of 3 books, the latest being Changing Lives, Gustavo Dudamel, Al Sistema, and the Transformative Power of Music. So welcome to you all tonight, or today, depending on where you're coming from, of course.
Thank you, Brent.
As Alexandra mentioned, we have a 4th guest who couldn't be with us. Just to introduce her, although I think equally she needs little introduction, but Joyce DiDonato is a multi-Grammy award-winning opera star. She was the 2018 recipient of the Olivier Award for Outstanding Achievement in Opera. She is also a producer and educator. Her groundbreaking Eden project, which toured over 45 venues across 5 continents, has been touring since 2022, also includes an album, a groundbreaking or innovative education program, and multiple partnerships. And we'll be hearing from Joyce as well during the course of this discussion, with some recorded excerpts from my conversation with her earlier this week. And of course, we want to welcome your participation today. So as Alexandra said, just raise your hand, we'll come to you. If you feel more comfortable, just pop a question or comment in the text, and we will get to you. And of course, guests, please feel free to jump in at any time. I think it's really important to have a dynamic, interactive conversation. We want to come out of this, obviously, with a sense that, of having shared the ideas and being able to get some really good engagement and sharing of perspectives. So just as a quick introduction, Alexandra spoke about the topic, but I mean, as we all know, art and music in particular is a well-known social agent, and music has long played a role in conscientizing people and communities and nations on social issues, bringing people together, expressing experiences, and really mobilizing people to take action for social change. Goes back generations. And in recent decades, this social transformation role has been evident in the field of music education as well. So I think we're here to understand better the role of music education in the climate crisis and environmental awareness. And perhaps a good place to start is to better understand how music itself as an art form is suited to bring about social change, how it impacts us, how it can move us, shape ideas and our outlooks in ways that we know that regular activism falls short in. And so a good place to start would be Joyce, as someone who's been a working musician all her life. She understands this well. And so I'd asked her about her journey in music from an entertainer towards somebody, an activist, essentially, a change maker, rather, who uses her music for social impact. So let's hear from that, from Joyce. Alexandra, if you could just play that clip.
For a long time, I performed on stage in these great works and these great themes. And I was really, very happy to do that. But as I had the chance to curate some more of my own projects, I thought, I don't know if we're getting it. I don't know if the audience, I don't know if it's landing. Sometimes I think they feel it's enough to listen to pretty music. And I personally think it's a moment to let the pretty, beautiful, masterful music bring a lot more awareness into our lives. And it's not, this is something that especially, the young people, they're looking at the world and say, we have to change. I want the young people to go back in history and say, we have examples of this already. We have examples of people. So let's build on what has worked before. Let's build on these messages that have been coming. I'm very careful not to take a posture of sort of preaching. It's tricky as an artist, I think, because people purchase a ticket or an album or they stream your music because they like you as an artist. And my first job is as a musician. If they're coming to see Joyce DiDonato, it's as a singer. But the thing I can never erase from myself is that I'm a citizen first, and I'm a citizen of the world. And so I have these amazing masterpieces of Myslevicek and Handel and Mozart, Mahler, that have already said a lot of these things and demonstrated them in the music quite well. And so what I'm taking the liberty to do is reframe them a bit and present them to an audience and say, this feeling that we build together as a community tonight of 2,000 people in the concert hall, what can we do to take this outside those doors, onto the street, into our home, into our neighborhood, ultimately into our heart, because that's the only thing we can really, really, really control. But are we doing anything to keep these things that are stimulated and built through art and concert hall? What am I doing as an individual to nourish that and build that as I go home?
I'm wondering, Joyce, if the common denominator, or the device there is beauty, because you were talking earlier about, not feeling that it was really landing. What makes a message, or what makes art land in a way that moves people to shift mindsets, to change attitudes, to change them essentially?
Such a good question. I do think it's pure beauty, but I think it's not the same as listening to something beautiful and on your home, in your headphones or your home stereo. There's something about being in the room together with hundreds of other people or thousands of other people, and everybody agrees to go there. Everybody says, okay, I'm here. Ultimately, what they really want is open my heart. You have to be very brave to do that as an audience member, as a listener, and say, okay, I'm going to let the tears fall. I'm going to let you open my heart. But ultimately, that's why everybody is there, period. What I have found is I think the more clear intentioned and the more of a kind of, it's hard to find the right word, sort of a messenger, but not quite a preacher in a way, that the performer can be, to really let the purity of the beauty go through you. I'm finding that when I can put myself in as pure kind of state on the stage as possible, my impression is that the impact on the audience is much stronger.
Well, that was Joyce's, impressions of what music does. I want to come to you, Marshall, to get into the meat of this. So that was music education. Obviously, there's a lot of common ground with what Joyce is talking about from a performance point of view as a performer and musician. Can you just tell us, well, maybe a good point very briefly to start with what the El Sistema system is as one of the most successful examples of global music education for social impact. Just tell us a bit about that, and then maybe your understanding of how music education works in those kind of settings to move children and audiences.
Yeah, thanks, Grant, and inspiring words from Joyce. Well, I mean, the Sistema movement, which began in the 70s under this extraordinary man, Maestro José Antonio Abreu, what it did was to flip an opposite way round the way that a lot of us who are performers or musicians learnt. We learnt our instrument, and then we went on the concert stage and practiced and played, and it had whatever effect it had. But El Sistema starts the other way around. It says, let's start with the arts, looking at them as a vehicle for development, for transformation. And so your excellence works as you go and work, as you learn. But what you're doing is you're learning together how you can use this art as a powerful agent for something. That's why I like the idea of what Joyce was saying before. And if I just quickly go, I don't want to spend too long on talking about El Sistema. That's the basic idea. It's music ensemble making as a vehicle for social and development, us being together. And if I look back in my own career, over 25 years, I was a professional musician on stage, probably not at Joyce's level. But the thing you're aware of is, and you sit there on a stage, and there are the people in the audience. And, I have to go back to kind of Greek rhetoric, which is the idea that whether you're a lawyer or you're a dancer or a performer of any sort, you have a power. It's about the power of the performer to influence the audience and to be with them. And one of my biggest things about this, since I've become kind of obsessed with the importance of us to take really seriously the problems of climate change and sustainability, I'm more and more thinking we performers, and now, artists, performers, have that power. You go on a stage and there's something very powerful you can do for people. And it's something that human beings have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. And actually, I think one of the mistakes we can make if we think about this in a pedagogical kind of music education context is, what do we need to teach kids so they have it already? And so I think the point here is it's a matter of unveiling and giving the space for young people's intrinsic motivation to be performers, to give messages about things they find important. That means that actually there's such a world of possibility. I don't want to spend too long at the moment doing that. We can come back to it in more detail. But my big point is SDGs, climate change, there is such a huge challenge there. And you know what? The arts and young people, there's nothing better fitted than that to go out there and be persuaders.
Right. Eric, to bring you in on this, I mean, there's been conversation around how successful music education programs have been around the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. I mean, talking about climate change, the climate crisis specifically, there's at least half of them that directly relate to those outcomes, relate to that issue. Could you talk a bit about how, in your experience, looking at the programs that you've worked with, and you've seen, studied, researched, how they are geared towards or primed towards, as Marshall was saying, ideally to help kids, internalize and take forward the messages of SDGs, and also in the inner development goals. If you could just also touch on that as well.
Sure. What I bring to this conversation is the commitment to the teaching artist workforce, that group of artists who develops educational capacities that actually can work in the high art space that Joyce is talking about and that some Sistema programs can form into, but that are actually able to be agents of development around both personal development, as in Sistema programs, and more targeted to actually accelerate commitment to a social issue like climate. The example I would love to share, because it connects with Joyce, is a body of work that I did with Joyce, and I'm going to put some links in the chat for people, where every stop on Joyce's global tour of Eden, where she would do a performance for rich ticket buying public, and in every city we hired a teaching artist connected to the production who worked with a group of kids in a poor neighborhood on a local environmental challenge they lived with. They worked creatively in the way teaching artists do. The work was actually to raise their awareness of the issue, to raise their sense of having agency around the issue. And the work carried where they performed in the finale with Joyce on the stage. So it brought them into the high art space. If you happen to go to that impact report, the first link that's in the chat, that actually details what was done in each of the cities of her tour and what the impact was. And if you look at that impact, you'll see significant increases in just 3 to 6 workshop sessions where the kids actually felt they could make a difference, which is right on the SDG target. Much of the weakness in education is we tell kids about stuff or get them to learn stuff, but it doesn't necessarily turn into a sense of hopeful agency, a sense that they can change their understandings and their actions. So that teaching artist workforce working directly with kids, and that's the expertise of teaching artists, to activate the artistry of others. As Marshall was talking about, the innate musical capacity that gets tapped in El Sistema, in teaching artist work, that innate artistic capacity is tapped and channeled, and can be channeled toward climate awareness, climate commitment, and actual sense of agency to make change. So in those two links, if you look them up, the first one has details on impact, and the second one has the curriculum used in every city of Joyce's tour so far. The tour's still going on, but this is what the teaching artists did to take kids from, I don't know, they said, join this project, all the way to a real, I would say, activation of their sense of mission.
I'm just curious, Eric, if you can very briefly just explain what was the methodology for impact? I mean, how did you mentioned significant increases in awareness and knowledge, etc. How was that measured? I'm just curious.
Well, it's quirky in every setting. A teaching artist would pick what their particular focus was. It's important that it be a passion for that teaching artist. Let's say they're very concerned about a local environmental issue of flooding. So through creative exploration, the kids kind of get a sense of how is flooding and what are the challenges and what can we make that captures what's not right about this? And in that process, the teaching artist then starts to guide them on what are the choices that we've got? What are the choices we make in our day? What are the choices you could ask your family about that affect the flooding issue? And so there's this kind of organic once humans are engaged creatively, they want to make stuff. And once they start making stuff, they want that to go somewhere. So the kids found themselves naturally into conversations with families and community members about this particular issue. And so when they went to the concert hall to sing with Joyce in the finale, a space they never would be in otherwise, they were on fire with the fact that Joyce was leading the charge and they were the troops right behind her to make change. And they felt it was their job, and it comes through their creative activation.
Great. I want to come back to Joyce talking a bit about Eden, the Eden project itself as well in just a short bit. But I mean, just to follow up, Trisha, if we can, on these examples. I mean, again, that's the Eden project engagement is a fantastic example of those kind of outcomes that can be measured, that we could see. What other examples are you aware of that can sort of add towards, or maybe be potential to contributing towards curricular development around this, particularly related to SDGs? Because again, I think as Eric and Marshall alluded to, that's a very strong area for engagement, and something that we can latch on to.
Yeah, thank you, Grant. I would say that in the area of music, particularly, and music education, directly, an example of that directly impacting the SDG, the climate SDG, that one, this is a rarity, what Eric was talking about. I don't see that happening very much with Sistema programs. I certainly don't know a lot about what every Sistema program is doing, but it's not, I haven't seen that rise to the surface yet. What I have seen and can talk about a little bit, which maybe by analogy can inform us, is places where other SDGs are really impacted by Sistema programs. And if Grant, would you have access to the SDG chart? Would you be able to get that up on the screen for a minute?
Sure. Yeah.
That'd be great.
You can, if you want to go on, we'll circle back to this very short.
Sure. Well, you all are probably familiar with the picture of the 17 SDGs. There are 16 of them named, and then the 17th is how they work all together. And one thing that's notable on this chart is that the arts are not one of the SDGs. So I've always rationalized that by thinking that maybe the arts are the driver, as we're talking about today, a major driver for all of these ideas, all of these things. So I can talk about a little bit, I want to give you examples by isolating a few of the SDGs that I have really seen Sistema work, and to a larger extent, music education for social change work, really have an impact. Let's start with Sustainable Development Goal. There we go. So Sustainable Development Goal number 3, good health and well-being. So I see a lot of Sistema programs and music for social change programs having really done remarkable work here. One example that you all are probably familiar with is Sistema Scotland in Glasgow, the Big Noise program, which worked with a government agency for public health and a university to really measure their impact, and their strongest impact that was found was on good health and well-being in the community where this program happened. There are other kinds of impacts on good health and well-being. I think about Juneau Alaska Music Matters in Alaska, where the children are taught in the traditional language of their place of birth, of their community, which is the Tlingit. They're taught, this is an extraordinary program. You should definitely give it a look if you don't know about it. Juneau Alaska Music Matters, or JAM, J-A-M-M. They teach children Tlingit, and some of the children know it maybe a little bit, and some don't, but they teach their lessons in Tlingit. They give examples of, they'll teach bowing and instrumental, all kinds of instrumental techniques using metaphors and stories, folktales that the culture uses. So their whole teaching is imbued with the traditional culture that they live in, that sustains them, that they were brought up in. And there's a kind of beautiful health and well-being that comes from that. There are many other programs around the world that address this goal that way, with using indigenous cultural values and musics to really give the children a sense of where they belong, who they are, what their ties are to their ancestry. Other ways, let's look at SDG number 5, gender equality. I have seen, and you all have seen, Sistema programs powerfully impact that. In ghetto classics in Kenya, there are where there's still a strong bias towards sort of male superiority. They're integrating young women and girls into their orchestral ensembles, and they play just as beautifully, and they're just as important and impactful, and they're fully 50% of the students. And then there was an amazing program, which you all probably know about, the Afghan program Anim, which is obviously no longer extant, but they incorporated girls in a culture where girls playing music was absolutely taboo. They incorporated girls in such a powerful and strong way and gave them such agency. That's a real example of using music for gender equality. Let's look at SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. The Venezuelan luthier system is a perfect example of this, where they're giving children very usable and useful skills in repairing and creating instruments, which is going, if they don't go on to be professionals in music, which most of them can't, they can definitely use these skills to help get themselves employed and well paid. Other examples, many programs in North America actually incorporate academic tutoring in their curricula, and that really helps bring the children who are struggling in their school days. It gives them, they take them out for a break from music, and they give them academic tutoring to get them to the point where they're going to be able to graduate from high school. They're going to be able to go on to higher education and hopefully vocational success. And then finally, let's look at the SDG number 16, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions. There are, if we include refugee aid in that, then we have Sistema Sweden, we have Sistema Greece, we have the Dream Orchestra, we have a powerful example of conflict resolution in Srebrenica in the Bosnian Sistema program. And then sort of outstanding in my mind in this regard is the program in Colombia, the country of Colombia. The program is Batuta, that's their Sistema program. It's huge, it's got 50,000 or more students. And it started in 1990, specifically funded by the government as a tool for conflict resolution. And it has remained very active in that way, in the interactions between rebel cultures and the government-controlled areas in the 90s, and then moving forward, being able to reintegrate people who had been in conflict with each other back into a civil society. So then there's SDG number 10, reduced inequalities, which I think you can't show me an example of a program anywhere that doesn't work for that goal. We all are aiming to reduce the inequality of access to substantial good music education. So that is a powerful, that is a area where we have powerfully impacted society in a positive way for an SDG.
Thanks, Trisha.
Yeah.
Sorry to stop. I just want to bring some other, some other speakers in. And if
That's just throwing out some ideas, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. But that is a really thorough, fantastic, assessment of, or at least array of programs all over the world that are engaging SDGs. So I guess for me, the question comes back to, we can measure impact, we can see what they've done. We've seen the growth, we've seen development, we've seen the partnerships that Joyce also spoke to and that Eric knows about with Eden, for example, and ITAC. There's all these structures that have been developed, backed by solid research and evidence-based learning. the question is, how do you impact institutions, policymakers, governments? I know you mentioned one of the programs in South America, I think it was Colombia, where there is government funding, and I'm sure that there is on different levels, but how do we really get traction with that to see real effective, to see these programs scaling, for example? I mean, Marshall, perhaps you could come in. I know that you're very familiar from an EU perspective about policy and how governments are positioning themselves, or at least are opening themselves up to seeing how they could support, this kind of cultural work.
Yes, thanks very much. And I think Europe's a very interesting example in this respect. I mean, I think we all know that these things work best when you free the bottom up and you help with the top, from the top down. And if I think back in 2015, the member states of the European Union and the EU, they adopted the SDGs, and they actually said in their resolution of that year, we adopt these and we wish to be front runners in this respect. And what have they done? Their major funding program, if you look at Creative Europe, which is something like, what is it, 2.5 billion euros over 7 years, they have these things they call cross-cutting areas. Anybody who wants funding from the EU for cultural work through the Creative Europe program, or Erasmus Plus, which is like 40 billion euros over 7 years, you have to show, what are you doing about the question of climate change? What are you doing about gender equality? What are you doing about diversity, equity, representativeness, and inclusion? So I think there's, they often don't get a very good press, the EU, but actually, I think this is an incredible thing. And I know this happens in other places. And I think increasingly, we are going to see the funding authorities wanting to know, what are you doing about these important social areas if you'd like some of our money? And I think that's a great thing. So I think, there is an example there of how that works. And I know not a lot of national governments are doing that. So I think from a kind of the point of view of the institutional side, I think there's a really good example there of how that should work. But of course, we need to keep banging the table about it, because that's the only way that this will work. And, I see that there's a question come in from somebody who's an archivist and researcher in the archaeology of climate change. And I do think that it's, when I see a question from somebody who's not in my field, I know we're doing something right, because we're connecting outwards into other networks. And I think that's another aspect of kind of civil society, which is we need to make broad networks and come together to find those who are on the same page as us in the other areas of disciplines of culture and heritage that there are.
Thanks, Marshall. Zabia, do you want to expand on your question, or do you feel it's been covered to this point?
So, hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Clearly, thank you.
Hi Grant. It's good to see you again.
You again,
So,
yes.
thank you for this meeting. It's really important, and I was really keen to know, because I'm a singer, I'm an artist, I'm an archivist, and I'm also a researcher in the archaeology of climate change. So you were talking about education, about children, about young generations, and I agree totally with you about it. But we also need to engage more people from the whole categories in the society. So I was actually waiting to see that there are some social events or more initiatives to engage those categories with the aim of, with this topic to raise the awareness about climate change using music, as music is a social, actually it has a big social impact in the society. So as you mentioned at the beginning, that in the video you showed, that for people, they pay money to go and attend and see a singer or whatever. So we have a big impact in the society. So how can we use this impact in the climate issue? So I don't know if there are any initiatives. I might have some ideas later So that's my question.
Thanks, Sabia. I want to bring
Good.
in you, Eric, if I could. I mean, because ITAC works in communities as well. Again, yes, Sistema is youth-focused. Many of these programs are youth-focused, and we understand why, what the value of that is. But perhaps if you want to take a shot at responding to Zabia's question about, the more diverse aged demographics and how maybe more broadly communities can be engaged.
Thank you, Grant, and allow me to be the skeptic in the group. I have heard, for my taste, too many people in the arts claiming their performances are transformative. I'm getting sick of hearing that phrase. I composed a piece of music based on whale sounds, and when I performed it, people were moved. It was transformative. And whenever I have the courage to say, oh yeah, what was transformed and how do you know it? People leave the room pretty quickly. So in the International Teaching Artists Collaborative, we decided to take on that challenge. In fact, what does it take to do what you might call transformation, which is what does it take for someone to change what they understand and the actions that they take as a result. And I'm going to put in the chat box at Grant's hint some of the work of ITAC Climate, ITAC International Teaching Artists Collaborative, and the Climate Initiative. We commissioned teaching artists, none of the 11 who have won awards have been musicians. They've been in all other art forms. I think it's hardest for musicians, maybe even hardest for classical musicians, harder than any others. But in these other fields, they have had a modest commission to actually undertake what we're coming to know, work over time in a community that directly addresses a climate issue of need that is local, that creatively involves the community in gathering information, dealing with the realities, activating their sense of agency. And in almost every single one, there has started to be an upwelling, working from the grassroots up, whether that's women farmers in the Philippines or intergenerational work in rural Alaska, that they rise up and start approaching their elected officials. They rise up and start making noise about something that must be done. The heat festival outside Sydney, where heat was basically killing people in Indigenous communities, rising up to make demands that this get addressed for that community and not just the air-conditioned blocks in town. So what we're coming to understand that it takes is work over time that creatively engages the participants, those who are directly affected with a climate issue, including the extra extent into, so what are we going to do about it? That doesn't just leave one hopeless because of the difficulty of the challenge, but leans right into, and where do we take this energy? And one last note, in a project in Brazil, where kids in a small Brazilian town went through this beautiful curriculum called the School for the Impossible, ended up exploring the local climate issues, and ended up in a town hall where they challenged the adults of their community for what are they going to do about it? Here's what we've discovered. Here's what's not okay. What are you going to do about it? And that program has now been mandated across every elementary school in that city and is being adopted in Scotland. So we are discovering it's not so facile as people in the arts like to propose, that being moved about a climate issue doesn't take it all the way for the kinds of systemic change you're asking about. But in fact, it's entirely possible within the strength of the arts to accomplish that.
Thanks, Eric. You mentioned in one of those examples where people went to their local officials and demanded change. I mean, we all know how change happens within people, within organizations, within communities. But, one might argue that's where the rubber meets the road for real change. If you're talking about how do we see changes in the way our, our government respond to climate change, what measures they take, mitigation measures, etc. I wanted to, if I could, I mean, just, and again, I know, Marshall, you touched on this when talking about EU policy and approach of the European Union and their governments towards supporting ventures like this, the culture's role in systemic change. But if I could just, Alexandra, play a clip, bring Joyce back in to give her another chance to participate. She was talking about, I asked her about policy making. So with Eden being a really successful example, how do you scale something like that? Not only replicate it, but how do you take it to policymakers? How do you engage those structures that are important to see real societal change in terms of laws and policies?
This, I think, is going to come towards the end of the project. So we go this year into Asia and South America, and we finish up in some summer festivals in Europe. I did a project before called War and Peace, Harmony Through Music. And I think we ended up doing almost 50 concerts, 40 or 50 concerts around the world. And I finished in Washington, D.C. And the last element of this project was a conversation with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Supreme Court Justice. And it was one of the last interviews that she gave to try and tie these elements together. I'm trying not to believe that the War and Peace project was a complete failure because, humanity, when are we going to get it? This is an element that I think once we're of course always inviting policymakers and change makers, particularly through the presenters, and that's important to have them experience this concert in real time. But I think once I have the conglomerate together at the end, that we have over 50 countries, 50 cities that we've been able to visit, 4 continents, at that time, probably close to 4,000 children that have joined us. I think we want to continue to house this and as an example of how this can live online and continue to flourish through creation and songwriting, but to target it absolutely at in my regard, the reason I want to go to policymakers is I don't know enough about the elements of the climate and diplomacy and all of this. It's very complicated. I'm not an expert on that. Where I want to put my energy is to arts education, getting that into the policy, because boy, I don't know that any of us have really cracked the code in the classical industry about how to affect change. Our audience just isn't quite big enough. I think we need the Beyoncés and the Taylor Swifts for a real tidal wave of change. I'm not diminishing what we do by any means. I'm not diminishing it. But I do think where I could make the most impact is on education, arts education. And that is, I will have had this War and Peace project and the Eden project. And the next one is where I really want to put those pieces together. And I really want to affect change with that. And I think that it's a long-term vision and picture. It's not going to change overnight. But it is the key to developing people who know how to problem solve, to developing people who know how to be creative, to employ people who know how to work together. And if we're building more citizens like that, policy will change. They will be the policy makers. I don't know if I can get to Joe Biden today to make him change policy. I don't know. Maybe I'm underestimating myself, but I feel like the investment is on empowering young people to say, you feel strongly about this. Here's how we're going to go about it. First of all, learn to use your voice. Second of all, be creative. Third of all, learn how to problem solve and learn how to work together. So I feel like that's where my strength is going to lie.
to pick up on that, I mean, the issue of mobilization and what Joyce was talking about, that in a clip that we didn't play, was about, and it's been mentioned already today, of the capacity for young people to be mobilized and to use their energy, their agency. I'm just wondering, just following on from that, you know, what is the scope for that kind of mobilization on the level of impacting policy, of getting, governments to local governments, regional governments, national governments to listen and respond in ways that support this, not only with funding, but again with policy. I'm just wondering if anybody.
I'd love to come in here because I think Eric and Joyce's last two contributions really took us into an interesting place in this conversation. And, Eric, you're absolutely right when you said, especially in classical music, but generally performers, it's very easy to have this kind of sense of entitlement. Oh, we moved the audience. It's great. And of course, often that's not the case. And what does that do? Fine. So I'm just interested thinking the European Union Youth Orchestra has a kind of policy for environmental sustainability and for DEI and gender, which is based on three principles: learn, do, persuade. And the thing is, I think we've got to get it right in all three compartments. So first of all, we need to become acquainted. We need to educate ourselves about these issues, and we need to find the ways of making those things manifest in a way that's powerful. And then we have to find, how does that persuade and lead to change? And I just very briefly and quickly want to talk about a project I've been involved in, which I think kind of points the way a little bit to what that could be. Let me just quickly just get to one image I want to show you of a project called the Uncertain Four Seasons. This was a brilliant idea. It brought together scientists and artists in Australia who basically said, let's do a thought experiment. Let's imagine, what would your city sound like in 2050 if we don't do anything about climate change now? And we're going to take Vivaldi's Four Seasons, hugely well-known piece, one of the most iconic pieces of music for classical music in the world, and we're going to say, let's put this through a computer. We're going to do geospatial data algorithms for what every city in the world, what would Vivaldi's score like if he was writing it in 2050 in that city and nothing had been done about climate change? And this was done in 2021. It went all around the world, about 14 projects in 4 or 5 continents. And I'll put the link in the chat later. The thing about that's very interesting is the European Union Youth Orchestra then used this on tours. So we go in Poland, in Romania, in North Macedonia, in Greece, and we play concertos which are Vivaldi, but written for your city, where the audience is, with the geospatial data for that city. And it's so interesting. This is where you link in with people, because it's my city they're playing. It's not some Vivaldi stuff, from some palace 200 years ago. This is my city in 15, 20 years at the time if we don't do something. And so I think that project is a really useful and interesting idea of the word creative has been used and thrown around. And I think this is part of, this comes back actually, Zabia, what you're asking about. If we want to make our connections into different parts of civil society, we have to use that creative input. So this is a really creative project. Interesting enough, it was done in 2021. They took it to COP26 in Glasgow and, made noise with it there. Apart from, I think, the European Union Youth Orchestra, I don't think it's been taken anywhere else. So there's a bit of learning and doing going on there, but not persuading. And for me, it was very interesting. We did it, for example, in Thessaloniki. There was a scientist who came on, talked about the city and the temperatures, how they were going to be in 2050 there in the summer. And a couple of Greeks kind of got up and they got quite exercised. What are we going to do about this? At that moment, you've done your work, because it's kind of handing over the energy. And actually, by the way, Eric, what you said and what Joyce has said has just inspired me to think about what's the next step for the EUIO with that set of concertos. I think we now need to move on to the question beyond the Uncertain Four Seasons. What happens next? and using the kind of methodology which you've outlined that ITAC uses and which the Eden Project has used. Let's go into cities and work in more depth and get people involved in this. And you know what's very interesting is that the methodology for this has existed for decades. You know, in the 1980s, when I was a violinist, and when Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister in the UK and had taken money away from being funding arts at school, the musicians and the artists were given the job of, well, you better go into school and kind of work with kids and do some work. And what's interesting is that the whole methodology came out of that movement in the 1980s and 90s about actually, how do you stop? You asked me, Grant, to talk a little bit about institutions, but let's talk about it from the other way around. How do you go into schools and work with kids in ways that, you know, I was working with kids that don't play music instruments. It wasn't a matter of saying, well, this is the way you hold the instrument. It's actually provoking their own sound from within. So I actually think there is an interesting opportunity here, and it's a very important one. And Eric, yes, you know, the musicians should not be resting on their laurels. But I still would maintain, we've got an interesting polemic here. I'd still maintain there's an incredibly extraordinary power that's there in the arts and culture. It's about how we maneuver it.
I want to pick up on that if I could very quickly. Sorry, Tricia. Marshall, you know, the issue of schools and support for, you're talking about going into schools, which I think is, you know, actually a no-brainer direction to go into. And CAN is working at the moment on a groundbreaking study with Dr. Hedy Lachman of NYU School of Education that looks at the marginalization and the marginalization and the decline of arts education in public schools globally, particularly in the West, but we're looking at it all around. And some of the results are, so far, the early findings show that, you know, and I'm not saying anything that I guess you don't know, but funding, resources, for a myriad of reasons have just dwindled in schools. So I'm just wondering, when you talk about going into schools, how much of that is sort of an impediment, because you're also coming against education systems that don't regard art perhaps in the same way as they do science or technology or language, for example. And you know, how do you work with some of those biases? I'm just curious on the ground.
I don't know whether Eric wants to answer. Can I just quickly say one thing, which is this is where movements like El Sistema come in. Because if you want to go into schools, yes, you're suddenly in this huge business of the culture of the school, of the authority, the way it's done. Everybody's afraid of moving because of health and safety. There are lots, you know, it's challenging. But with El Sistema places, in these nucleos, you've got ready-made spaces where, because it developed in Venezuela, it's not like, okay, let's spend 6 months doing a plan and a safety check. No, let's try it out. As they say in Venezuela, if you get it wrong, okay, we'll change it tomorrow. So I think what's interesting, and Eric mentioned other places, and also Tricia, which is you need to go to those fast-moving, fleet of foot educational initiatives, and they're not just to do with music; they're all sorts. And those are the places where I think you can find an open door to push on to try new stuff without saying, oh, we better bring in the inspector to make sure this is okay. Sorry, Eric, you should come in.
I do, but you go ahead.
I would just respond that getting time in school curriculums is the hardest currency there is. And there can be some gains there, you know, there can be some movement projects, little working around the corners. That's not where we're going to get to turn on kids in the kind of depth and creative excitement that it takes to transform understandings. So as Marshall is suggesting, out of school time opportunities are the place to go. Engaging kids in what they love to do is the way to get there. And man, once kids are turned on to something they love doing, once their intrinsic motivation is activated, the work has begun at that point. So it's thinking about having to jam into schools is not going to be a recipe for success, but there's all kinds of opportunities around that.
I just
Sorry.
like to pick up. Go ahead.
I just wanted to take a question from Monica, and we can come directly back to you, please.
Sure.
Hi. This is absolutely fascinating. It's really hugely interesting, and I've just got some thoughts coming through as everybody's speaking. I'm not a musician. I'm actually in sort of business, so very different background to all of you. But it's a hugely interesting, and just kind of looking at some of the points that were being made, and in terms of how to get the engagement and how to get that interest and things like that to happen. And I just wondered whether any of the sort of religious institutions have been considered, particularly within communities, and I'm talking about sort of Black communities. That's a very powerful, hugely powerful space. Certainly with the organisation that I'm involved with at the minute, they've built the school literally on, through the support of the sort of religious institution, who want to promote classical music in particular, more so than any other genre at the minute, because they see all the benefits of classical music for the communities, and the way that it has helped a lot of the young people, particularly in sort of areas where they don't have many other opportunities or chances, if you like, to access that type of education because it's just too expensive, or it's just something that their parents have never done before, or it's something that they just don't generally value because, they can't see the returns, the financial returns by sort of doing it. So I just wondered whether there's been a sort of a consideration to go towards an approach. Not all, okay, I appreciate not all religious organizations will have interest, but a good few would. And I just think that would be a really good place to look at investing some of that, your energies and time and focus in terms of how do we get to the hearts and minds of the communities? Because if the pastors start to talk about this initiative, the environment and music and everything else, they will listen to their pastors. They will take that on board, and they will, try to then start maybe considering it as a direction for their young people, for themselves, for their young people to maybe sort of go into the music industry as well as to take on board the sort of environmental issues as well. So it's bringing the two together. It could be done. I'm fairly certain of that. I just think that needs to be considered. You might want to perhaps take that on board as well. In terms of policy, and in my mind, the way to make things happen is through votes, generally speaking. So again, if that's what I think. I mean, what moves politicians in any area is how many people are going to vote for me, so I can win my election, just in basic terms. And so again, if enough people within a constituency, and this is where I think the religious institutions as well can play a part, because they will have councillors, they will have MPs, they will have all sorts going to the churches. That if you can get if you can sort of focus, I guess, in terms of getting organizations, religious institutions, schools, parents, people thinking about it also from the perspective of votes, make that a part of the campaign, if you like. It's just very basic, not basic, but it's just very, I just think that might be the way. It's, the only thing that's going to move, in my mind, a politician is the need to get re-elected. So whatever it takes to make that happen, basically, whatever one needs to do to try and get more votes will affect their behavior in terms of, trying to kind of come up with new policies around that particular issue. The environment is obviously everybody's is looking at that as well, but people want a benefit for themselves. They want to see directly how is it going to help them, and I think that's where the classical bit comes back in, because classical education, certainly in my experience anyway, and my daughter's experience and things like that, has allowed her and allows the children that are within Eltsum, for example, to aspire to more, to be able to gain more, it improves their sort of their math skills, their English, all the sort of the basic low-level stuff that no one really thinks about much necessarily sometimes. But if that can be promoted, and the churches themselves promote that particular point, if they can see that direct benefit coming back to them, then they will want to engage more in it, essentially.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, Monica, for that input. Tricia, do you want to pick up?
I would love to. I'd love to pick up on what Monica's saying, especially about the churches and the religious institutions. Many El Sistema programs and Music for Social Change programs actually are take place within churches or are sponsored by churches. And I think that the reason that you're right about this, that this is so important, is that a church is a genuine community. And if you think about the way all of the impacts toward the SDGs that I was talking about and that Eric was talking about, if you think about the way that that actually happens, it has to be within a community where people know each other, where people have a sense of togetherness and commitment towards each other's welfare, and can actually communicate with each other. I think that churches are great for that. I think that what I do think is that all climate activism, in a sense, begins at the community level. And and I would also say that kids, in my experience, and I'm sure in your experience as well, kids are all worried about the environment. They are all worried about climate, much more than 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds. Kids they get it somehow. They're all worried about it. So the intrinsic motivation is definitely there. If a community, a supportive, activist community is also there, and if you have the impact of the arts and especially music, I think there's an enormous amount of power there. And, when you think about all of the programs that I mentioned before, the sort of the common thread is those two things: intrinsic motivation on the part of the kids and community activism at a local level. So really powerful. Thanks.
Thank you, Tricia. Zabia, you have your hand up. Is it related? But come on in.
Yeah, so just to clear my idea, that when I said that artists can contribute is not to move the audience. Actually, we're not gonna stop the climate change, to be honest. It's just a contribution to do something as human beings. Because we are not gonna affect the industries or the the really big stakeholders in the world or politicians. We are going to focus on the societies we are in. And you are totally right. We cannot move the audience, but we can start by now it's a social media era, to be honest. So we can see, for example, if they are promoting for one challenge, that a lot of young people, youth, they will move to do these challenges, crazy ones, So this can be one way, but there are many other ways to promote for the climate crisis through my idea as an archaeologist at the first point is to make it like cultural events that is engaging traditional music, because I'm Syrian originally and I'm living in Portugal for such a long time. And from my own experience, I saw that music is the common language between human beings, because when I first arrived here, I had difficulties integrating the society. But when I first started to sing fado, which is the traditional Portuguese music, everybody was welcoming me. They were, I had really good acceptance and good feedback from them. So, and they were integrating with all with all the process. So I can, as an artist, promote for an event, a cultural event, which means to engage different type of art, either if it is through filmmaking or focusing on the material culture, because material culture is a very important part. We want, as in this time, We want to how to say, like, encourage people to go back to the life before the industrial age, right? So in order to do this, we want to highlight about that time when people were living like producing and consuming at the same time, for example, right? So there are many ideas that I can give. I don't have the time to explain about my project actually, but there are many ideas that we as artists can have good impact on the societies we're living in. So that's just to clear it up. Thank you so much for the conversation, and thank you for giving me the chance to talk.
Thank you, Zabia. And it just struck me the experience that you're talking about social inclusion, about finding common ground, like you did with the fado music, traditional Portuguese music, is at the heart of what Sistema is about. And many of the other programs, I think that when people start feeling socially included, particularly young people, but of course it cuts across age demographics, there's a sense of agency that and community that rises up or that emerges. And then again, perhaps, is also where you start to see personal agency. It translates into, societal agency, I guess, where people feel, as groups feel more empowered to raise issues, to push for changes. And I think that's the natural progression that music education programs or programs that involve music in this way focus on. Does anybody want to pick up on what Zabia is saying? I know with remaining 9 minutes we have left, I'm wondering if, we can start looking at perhaps, just summarizing some of the key points. What are some of the takeaways of the discussion tonight? There's a lot that's been said and a lot of rich ideas. I'm wondering in terms of next steps, like how do we consolidate some of the key gains that we've spoken about today and move them forward. This is open to anybody. Perhaps Marshall, if you want to come up first.
Yeah, I think this. As I'm listening to the talk unfold, I feel there's a kind of golden triangle forming, which, if I think of Sistema as one example of the coming together of young people, and it doesn't have to be young people. There are other places where large numbers of people come together for, let's say, reasons of value, and put it like that. So that's one bit of the triangle. The other side of the triangle is a growing awareness, and I think was it Eric or Trisha, you referred to the fact that the kids get this. They know that the environment is being, excuse my language, screwed by the adults at the moment, and we need to do something about it, and they're the ones that will hear it. So you have these people there's a kind of people coming together in valuable groups, space. Churches was mentioned as one example of that. You have the imperative of what we need for the climate, and not just the climate, actually. Obviously, the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 of them, there are a lot of very relevant things here. So that's the second bit of it. And I think the third bit is, Eric's discussion of the pedagogy or not pedagogy, it's the change mechanisms. And Joyce is also referring to that. She's saying, can I get to Biden? Or what about Beyonce? That's when we get to scale this stuff. And in that conversation, I think we've articulated very well that on the one hand, there's this kind of we want the bottom up way of working because we know that gives meaning to those who do it. And Pache, what Eric's talking about, when you've got some meaning in it, your skin's in the game, your motivation is there, and it doesn't matter whether you're 5 years old or 90 years old. The same thing goes there. Your energy is going that way. And then there's this top down. So I see these three elements, and that to get it right, you've got to get a bullseye on all three. And we could talk in more detail of what's needed for that. By the way, Monica, although there are people from several continents around the world here, many time zones, you and I are about a few miles apart.
Really? Oh my goodness.
I just googled your site. I'm in a place called Wapping. So I'm also in East London at the moment, which is where my home.
I would love to.
We should take a coffee.
Definitely.
Yeah, let's do that. Anyway,
I've got loads of.
That's serendipity.
About this.
Okay, I hand back because I think you're right, Grant. The question is, we've got 5 or 10 minutes left.
I know.
What are the next steps? I've certainly got one for my own project beyond the uncertain 4 seasons. But let's look at this in more kind of detail.
Sounds great, and great to see more connections happening here on this platform. That's excellent. Or Eric and Trisha, I'd like you to come in and just, I wonder, this is a good point also, because it was a parting shot for Joyce, just talking about what's next for Eden. I mean, it's related to what you were saying a bit about policymakers and how to move it forward, but I wonder if we could just play that, Alexandra, it's a short clip, but just to give Joyce her parting shot, if you like.
I do feel that this is an industry changer. This tour, the last War and Peace in Eden, are setting up models for other artists to say, we tour, that's our model, that's what we do, but how can we do it in a way that leaves a real, in the case of Eden, leaving like a living footprint, not a carbon footprint, but an actual living one through, you know, we give seeds to every audience member that we have come to. And the kids are probably the strongest seed that we leave behind. And we spend extra time on the ground to do interactive and educational things. And I think that's really important, is to get the industry, the other artists, to look and say, okay, a 90-minute concert is great, but how else can I flesh this out? And who else can I align with when I'm on the ground in these various cities, so that it has a more rotund impact. I also see the presenters being challenged in a good way, because the old formula of just putting on a concert and, you know, hoping that it sells out, and that I'm not sure it kind of works in the same way anymore. So I've seen the impact of, I mean, I've been singing in major venues, in Carnegie Hall and the Barbican and Concertgebouw. And these are extraordinary presenters who have been doing this for decades and are good at what they do. But all of a sudden I'm saying, here's Joyce DiDonato, and bring in this local children's choir, and let's do something together. And they sort of go, oh, we should be doing more of that. Yes, you should. So it's also challenging the industry to be creative, to create a different kind of Eden on their concert stage that maybe looks different than it did 10 years ago, but it's actually serving the local community in a more rich and expanded way. And so I feel very good about, you know, challenging the industry to say, I think we can do more. I think we can go further. I think we can think outside the box more.
Eric and Trisha, with the few minutes we have left, if we can, and if I could ask our indulgence to go a few minutes over, just so that we can round up this important conversation nicely, that would be great. But Eric, do you want to take it first? I mean, what your...
Sure. Just a quick response. Part of the vision that I was able to enroll Joyce in is that this idea of engagement with the community becomes a standard of the touring field. And I must say, Taylor Swift did not respond to my good idea that there be girls' empowerment workshops in every city of her tour. But if we can get enough visibility, imagine the effectiveness of that. To take an SDG goal on a major, you know, giant mass market stadium tour for not significant amounts of money in addition, that is a way to really change the usual calculus. I must say, the arts are at the beginning stage of becoming effective at really moving a public toward SDG goals. The potentials are there. We haven't really engaged our gears yet. And once we get started, I think the results, at least from my own experience, are so disproportionately much larger than people expect. The future starts to multiply in terms of potential once we get some visibility.
Yeah, great. And I'd like to get back to the SDGs just for a moment, because we started there and I was talking about how some of the other SDGs have been very effectively impacted by our model of ensemble music education for social change, not so much climate. I don't want to leave with the idea that this isn't possible with climate. It's definitely possible. We've seen with Joyce, we've seen with the ITAC collaborative, the climate collective, that things are possible. We just have to figure it out in Marshall's Golden Triangle or whatever way we can. And I think because there are six of the 17 SDG goals are directly climate related. And the other thing I want to just leave you with is that as the European Union signed on to the SDGs formally and officially, lots of state governments have, lots of city governments have, lots of corporations have. Lego signed on, Nike signed on, JetBlue signed on to the SDGs, like formally, we want to do something to help the SDGs. So if we can get our language together about how we in the arts and specifically music education can impact 6 of those 17 SDGs, we can help you. We can say to these huge institutions, governmental, corporate, and NGOs, we can say, we're here, we can help you. We can help make this happen. If you partner with us, if we can work together somehow, we are agents of the change that you've signed on to. And I think this is a really powerful way to think about it, that we need to start thinking that way.
Absolutely. Global cultural celebrities, Taylor Swift, to multinationals like Nike, etc.
Exactly.
I think corporations need to be engaged just as much. Absolutely. As we wrap and say thank you first and foremost to Sistema Europe for organizing this, I wonder if I could beg an indulgence again, Marshall, just to touch very quickly on the Sistema Europe Youth Orchestra 24. Do you want to just very quickly share?
Well, yeah. Sorry,
Sorry, go ahead.
But I'm not muted. Sorry. I thought. I just wanted to say that one of the real reasons that Sistema Europe wanted to get involved in this with Learning Planet and with Can was that we do have this Song for the Earth project coming up this summer, and we need to make the most of. We got hundreds of young kids from all over Europe. We're going to make music together in Pesaro and Urbino, and it really is a great opportunity to actually think about the what next. And so I see, for example, Etienne Abelin is in our audience today here, and there are probably others listening. He's on our artistic planning committee for that. And I think the big thing is there's some great ideas here for us to now sit down and think, actually, how do we, within this idea of singing for the earth, how do we take this forward this summer? And I think there have been some really great ideas. I wanted to thank everybody, almost on behalf of Sistema Europe, to thank everybody for doing this, because we really wanted this not just to be a kind of think-in and that's it, but we do have this project in the summer, and now we need to fold this stuff in and think, where next? And actually, a lot of what you've talked about today makes me say, you know what? How much have we thought about the local communities in this project who live there? Let's go there. So that's it from me. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Marshall. And thanks, everybody. A really, really rich discussion. And as Marshall said, there was just so much in there that we can chew on, take forward, develop. Thanks very much. Back to you, Alexandra, for final word.
And thanks so much to Grant, who has been such an awesome host of tonight's evening. Thank you very much. Please connect. This video is going to be, it's now hanging on Facebook. But we will also edit a full version this time, including the sound at the beginning for YouTube. You will get the link so you can actually revise and revive in case you want to go back to any of the sections as well. And have a lovely afternoon, evening, night, whichever day or time of the day you're currently finding yourself in. And if you get the chance to make a trip to Italy this July, then do say hi in Pesaro. We'll be very happy to see you there. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.